This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, I speak with Kimbell-Art-Museum Deputy Director George Shackelford about the museum's current exhibit, Turner's Modern World. The exhibition explores J.M.W. Turner's lifelong interest in the inventions, events, politics, society, culture, and science of his time, which resulted in many of his most original works and transformed his way of painting. The exhibit is on view at the Kimbell through February 6th. At the end of the episode, I'll be taking a look at some of the week's top art headlines. But first up, a dive into Turner's Modern World with George Shackelford. Shackelford, thank you so much for being willing to be on the podcast today to talk about this current exhibit of J.M.W. Turner at the Kimbell-Art-Museum. Maybe you could start with kind of giving us some background on how the exhibit came about and what the history of this exhibit is.
Well, thank you first, Greg, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. Turner's Modern World is an exhibition that was organized by Tate-Britain in London, in cooperation with the Kimbell-Art-Museum here and with the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, where the exhibition will be shown in the spring and into the summer of 2022. It's a show that was really quite a natural for Tate to partner with Boston on, because Boston owns one of Turner's most important modern pictures, and I use modern with an underline and inverted commas around it. It is the Great Slave Ship from the Royal Academy of 1840, which unfortunately neither traveled to London nor is it in Fort Worth, but will be seen with the exhibition only in Boston. When Tate-Britain approached us about the exhibition, I leapt on it because I thought this is a great topic, and Turner is such a fantastic artist. I mean, in my mind, the greatest British painter, period, and having an opportunity to show more than 100 works by him, oil paintings, watercolors, drawings, one print, some sketchbooks, the full range of Turner's lifelong career from the 1790s to the 1840s. It was just too good an opportunity to pass up, even though the Kimbell's lone Turner could not be less modern. It is a subject taken from Ovid. So nonetheless, we were delighted to be invited to participate. Turner's Modern World the exhibition really concentrates on the idea of Turner's engagement with the world around him, not only with the facts of the world, like the rise in industrialization in Britain, the sort of changing means of transport and the rise of cities versus the country, etc., but also with the issues of war and peace. Turner living through a period of an enormous military conflict with the Napoleonic-Wars, and then also, to some extent, with Turner's involvement in politics and causes, which are touched on in the exhibition. And then finally, the modern painter, the notion that Turner's way of painting, a complete invention of his own, a complete transformation of his early style into this late style for which he is now most famous, that was in a way a modern act, an act of contemporary assertion of a new artistic way of being. So that's the sort of premise of the exhibition, grosso modo, across the whole 120 odd objects in the show.
I feel like an exhibit like this really benefits by learning a lot about context. For the folks that maybe didn't get a PhD in art history, could you just kind of set the stage for perhaps a term like the hierarchy of painting and
Yes.
and how that's something that he deals with over the course of this in terms of what subject matter he chooses to explore?
Well, in the Royal Academy, when Turner was a student there, the most important thing to do for a painter was to learn how to paint the figure, the human figure. And this was preparatory not towards portraiture, which was fairly low ranking, but towards the painting of history. And by that, I don't mean what happened last week, but in fact, what happened centuries ago. So the Greek and Roman history, or in Britain, sometimes ancient British history, would be the subject matter that would be expected of the Royal Academy successful artist. Turner was pretty lousy at it to begin with. That was not his forte. He was not, a great gifted draftsman of the human figure. And it wasn't what he was interested in either. He was interested in something much more, much more expressive to him, and that took the form of landscape. And landscape was, of course, already a British tradition. And in the 18th century, a lot of artists had turned to painting landscape because it was profitable. People liked to buy landscape paintings for their houses, and this is always a consideration of what an artist might turn to. He has to make a living, after all, and the British have always been nationally extremely interested in landscape and in the British landscape and in the conservation of landscape nowadays, and in the 19th century with the spoliation of landscape. But in Turner's day, landscape painting was not particularly revered as a discipline. It fit. It wasn't as low as still life, which was the bottom of the ladder, but it certainly wasn't as high up as history painting or any kind of religious subject matter, and even not as high up as portraiture would have been. But Turner really changed that. Turner was one of the artists, along with the slightly younger John Constable, who asserted that landscape painting was vitally important in terms of art history, and picking up on the lessons of the past, and particularly the great example for them was the Franco-Roman painter Claude Lorrain, who was active in Rome in the 17th century. And Claude was adored by British collectors, and therefore by the Academy, and then by the nascent National Gallery. And he was one of their archetypes, if you will, one of the artists that they strove to emulate. And Turner certainly goes through this Claudian period in his work. And for instance, we have in the exhibition a wonderful picture of Richmond Hill on the Prince Regent's birthday with the foretitle England, as if England were always a great landscape party. And it's completely based on a Claudian, prototype. Lots of golden light coming through the trees framing the composition on both sides, and a beautiful distant view of the landscape sort of receding properly into space and getting less and less defined as you go into the canvas. Figures in the foreground doing something to catch your interest there. And this is the kind of painting that by the end of his career, Turner was just completely had bypassed. Totally not interested in defining the figures in the foreground. I mean, they're pictures that we know are meant to represent something, and yet you can barely discern the subject in the painting at all. And so he revolutionizes landscape. Not only does he insist that it's important, he insists that he's going to change the way you perceive it, and that the public is going to learn about what painting should be through the example of his landscape painting. So I think that he rebels in a way against the academic rules and breaks them all, and succeeds brilliantly by virtue of doing so.
When I look at his prolific body of work, I try to imagine how his work would have been received. And I know that there are the shows at the Academy, but then he also had his own gallery space in his studio. The more difficult subject matter, would he necessarily submit that to show? Or is the difficult subject matter, whether it's a disaster at sea or the slave ship or work regarding Waterloo, was that for public consumption, or was it, the difficult nature more left to him sharing it in more intimate space?
Oh, it was absolutely for public consumption. The paintings that you mentioned, particularly Waterloo or the slave ship, were paintings that he definitely showed to the public, and in both cases actually with not a particularly great reception, because people didn't like the pessimistic, rather mournful tone of his Waterloo painting. It was, after all, the greatest battle that they had ever fought, and his painting was sad rather than joyful. The slave ship was a chaotic image visually and very challenging in terms of the subject matter of these enslaved Africans who were being thrown overboard so that they could be claimed for insurance rather than arrive dead or dying at their destination. Those kinds of subjects did not appeal to a Royal Academy audience, but Turner was insistent that those paintings would be shown to the public. The reaction to them, particularly by the 1840s, when he is at his full tilt, if you will, the reaction was often grounded in the appearance of the pictures, and people found them mystifying. Found the what they saw as chaotic brushwork, a kind of incoherent construction to the canvas, and which of course Turner was completely in control of. Absolutely, there's no chaos there. It's completely organized if it's chaos, and they saw them. They were baffled by what they looked like. They had not seen paintings that looked like that before. They were expecting, when it was a seascape, they expected for there to be a recognizable boat where you could see the outlines very clearly of the boat, and the horizon would be clear and you could see what was happening. And when Turner presents them with a kind of a whirlpool of snowstorm in one of his most daring paintings in the exhibition, they don't get it. They don't understand what's happening. And Constable had it right when he said that the public looks at Turner's paintings and they think he's making fun of them. And so in a reaction, they laugh at him, self-defensively. And of course, Turner's deadly serious, and he's not laughing at the public. He's just saying, I can't deal with you on any terms but my own, but my most honest terms for myself. And this is how I have to show my art to you, and come along with me. Let me lead you in a way towards a new way of looking, really. And the public just, in large part, the public was unwilling or unable to join him on that trip right away. Now, of course, he's one of the most popular artists in Britain. His painting, The Fighting Temeraire, is voted the most popular painting in Britain regularly, and now it's on the back of a banknote, and so he's beloved now. But certainly in his own day, in the 1840s, the cognoscenti got it, the collectors got it, but the public often didn't get it, and the critics made fun of him for, painting with mashed potatoes and gravy, when in fact he was just trying to convey something of the power and the majesty of nature.
Beyond what he was able to express through the form, a great deal of what we see in this exhibit is over his life's work, how he is reflecting the world around him in a time